Hello, everyone, and welcome into the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Motes. On today's show, we continue our journey through the Han Solo trilogy. Han and Chewie are on the run from the Empire. They take up smuggling for the Hutts, but soon they find themselves caught between the Imperials and the Smuggler's Moon of Nar Shaddaa. It's The Hutt Gambit by A.C. Crispin. But before I get into the book, let's answer some listener questions. I have 2 emails today. The first comes from Luke. Luke says, I've almost finished the Corellian trilogy, and after reading the Jedi Academy trilogy that you covered on the show, I've noticed how different characters seem to get grouped together. It's always Han, Chewie, and the Falcon. Luke and Lando always seem to get paired up with the droids, which I find ironic since Lando is always threatening 3PO, and the two don't get along very well. What do you think? Well, thank you for the email, Luke. I'm glad you're enjoying the Corellian trilogy. I'll be getting to those books in a couple years. Now, to answer your question, I think it's really only those 2 series where Luke and Lando get paired together in Legends. In canon, they're also paired together in the novel Shadow of the Sith. Now, it makes sense that Han and Chewbacca are paired together most of the time. Chewie pledged a Wookiee life debt to Han, and Han is the only person that can understand everything that Chewie is saying. In most Star Wars stories, Luke isn't really paired with anyone. He's usually alone, although most of the time he is with R2. And that's understandable, because as the only member of the Jedi Order following the events of Return of the Jedi, Luke's story is mostly going to be a solitary one. His conflicts are going to be more internal. They're going to be both deeply personal, but have an effect on a galactic scale. That's normally why he gets paired with R2. It's a character that acts as a mirror for Luke. Basically, R2 is the audience. It's something for Luke to bump his thoughts off of, but not necessarily answer in a way that the audience understands. I think that's one reason why in Legends, the Mara Jade character was created, to give Luke someone that he can interact with on, quote, his level, unquote. Now, Han, on the other hand, he gets a lot of the comedic moments in the Star Wars saga. That's why they like to play him off other characters. They play him off Leia, Chewie, Lando, or 3PO most of the time. But Han's plotline in the 2 Legends series that you are talking about, Luke, the Jedi Academy trilogy and the Corellian trilogy, those aren't the storylines that contain many of the lighter, more comedic parts that we usually see in Star Wars. So, in steps Lando Calrissian. He gets the lighter parts in those 2 series. Kevin J. Anderson and Roger McBride Allen use Lando, pairing him specifically with 3PO. Yes, I know some others are there with them, but it's mostly the Lando-3PO dynamic, which makes those story parts a little lighter. Now, Luke, the one character group that we almost never got in Legends, and to be honest, we haven't really gotten in canon to this point, is Luke and Leia. They have scenes together, of course, but they don't really have storylines together. And that's what I want to see. I want to see more of the Skywalker twins doing things together. Again, thank you for the email, Luke. Today's second email comes from TJ, who wrote a very nice message, but I had to edit it down some for the podcast. TJ says, often in your analysis and commentary, you reference Lucas's intent and vision for the story. While this is a legitimate form of media analysis, I find myself more on the death of the author side of stories. A story is a conversation between the author and the viewer. The intent of the author matters, but once a story is put into the world, the author's intent wanes, because a story must stand on its own to an extent. The Star Wars universe is fantastic because different authors see the same source material, add to it, and have a conversation with that material. I say this because I care little of what Lucas's original intent was for the story. I care more for how he communicated the intent in the canon material. What is your preferred analysis and film theory angles? Auteur theory or death of the author or others? Well, thank you very much for the email, TJ. It's clear you really enjoy thinking deeply about the books, shows, and movies that you consume. I'll be honest, I've never really thought that much about these types of theories. I've never really thought too much about that kind of analysis. But, to answer your question, if I had to choose, I'd be on the other side of the discussion than you are. I want to know what the creator's intent was. I think some creators are like that as well. I think Lucas is more on that side. Why else would he go back and redo the Han Solo Greedo scene in the cantina over and over and over again? It's because he didn't like the way the audience interpreted that scene. He said they just didn't get it. And personally, I think it can sometimes be dangerous to simply allow the audience to come up with their own conclusions about what they see or hear on the screen or in music or in books. And we see it in music all the time. I mean, look how many people clearly get the messages wrong in Born in the USA by Bruce Springsteen, or Every Breath You Take by The Police, Blackbird by the Beatles, or Waterfalls by TLC. And look how many people get the messages wrong from Fight Club or American Psycho. So since this is really the first time I've ever thought about this, TJ, I actually took a few minutes and sat there and pondered both sides. And what I came up with for me is, I'm not the artist. I did not create this thing. But I want to know why they created it. And I want to know what they meant in creating it. So, TJ, thank you very much for this question. It, for the first time, really made me kind of think about this. But I want to reiterate, I don't think about analysis very much. I don't. I don't really delve that deeply into these sorts of things. Normally, when I think about something that I see or I read, it's very surface level for me. It's basically just two questions. Does this make sense? And do I like it? That's about it. I don't know if this is a little bit of a tangent or not from your question, TJ, but I don't like media criticism. I try my best not to listen to what critics say or read what they write about. I don't know if that has anything to do with your question, TJ, but if it does, I just wanted to say that personally. I really couldn't care less what a critic says about anything. I hope I didn't overstep what your question was, but if it had some bit of that in it, that's my opinion on the subject. Once again, thank you very much for the question, TJ. Now, listener, if you have a question for the show, you can email me at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And if you'd like to get your voice on the show, you can record a short message and email it in, but please record it in MP3 audio format. Coming up at the end of the show, we'll hear from TJ again, as he has an opinion about something he noticed when reading Champions of the Force. It's a pretty cool insight. You'll want to stay tuned for that. But now it's time for today's book, The Hutt Gambit by A.C. Crispin. Grab yourself a drink. Let's head in to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. The story begins with Han Solo down on his luck. He's broke, he's been discharged from the Imperial Academy, and now he's stuck with a Wookiee who's sworn a life debt. Han can think of only one thing to do: return to a time when he lived on the wrong side of the law. Han and Chewbacca travel to the smuggler's moon of Nar Shaddaa and contact an old Academy buddy named Mako Spence. Mako puts Han and Chewie in contact with a ship mechanic named Shug Ninx, and soon the two find work repairing ships for some of the other smugglers and picking up the occasional piloting job, transporting cargo for the Hutts. Han makes a name for himself as one of the best pilots on Nar Shaddaa and quickly moves up the ranks in the Dasilagic Kejidik. The Hutt crime lord Jiliak and his nephew Jabba hire Han and Chewie for their most important and dangerous jobs, running spice, weapons, and illegal goods throughout the galaxy. Everything but slaves. Han Solo hates slavery, and he refuses to be part of the Hutt's slave trade. At first, Jiliak and Jabba are skeptical, but they agree to the young Corellian's terms, because Han's piloting skills are that good. On one run, Han and Chewie escape an ambush by pirates. They tell Jiliak and Jabba that they think the pirates were working for the rival Basidiai Kijidik. When Jiliak and Jabba accuse Basidiai's leader Auruk and his son Durga, the old crime lord is outraged. "Where's your proof?" he demands. Of course, Jiliak and Jabba don't have any, but they know Auruk ordered the attack. Because, thanks to Han and Chewie, the Dasilagic clan has been cutting into Basidiai's profits on the spice trade. Jiliak and Jabba secretly contact Teroenza, the Talanda Til who is running the Basidiai's spice refining operations on Elysia. The two Hutts promise the High Priest more control over the Elysian operation if he helps them eliminate Lord Auruk. Han and Chewie become known as the best smuggling team on Nar Shaddaa, and Han soon has a pocket full of credits and a girlfriend in every cantina. One night, Han and Chewie go take in a magic show. The two are fascinated by the illusions, but more than anything else, Han is captivated by the illusionist, a woman named Zavari. He meets her backstage after the performance, and soon the two begin seeing each other. Eventually, Han and Chewie agree to accompany Zavari on tour, working as stagehands for her shows. But when Han tells Zavari he wants to take the relationship to the next level, she refuses. Zavari pledged her life to taking revenge for what the Empire did to her family, and she says she can't allow anything, even romance, to take her away from that. After returning to Nar Shaddaa, Han is caught by a bounty hunter. The bounty hunter, Boba Fett. The Mandalorian was hired by Teroenza to catch Han in retaliation for the damage Han caused on Elysia 5 years ago. Luckily, Teroenza ordered Fett to take the smuggler alive. The High Priest wants to kill Han himself, and he wants it to hurt. A lot. Fett starts carrying Han onto his ship, when suddenly, the bounty hunter is jumped from behind and stunned. Han's saved by someone who introduces himself as Lando Calrissian. Lando is a professional gambler who says he needs a pilot to teach him how to fly. Han agrees, and Lando introduces the smuggler to a Corellian YT-1300 light freighter, the Millennium Falcon. Immediately, Han falls in love. It's perfect. The ship of his dreams. Han vows that somehow, some way, he'll make the ship his own. But for now, it's Lando's. And true to his word, Han teaches the gambler how to fly it. In exchange for the lessons, Lando allows Han to pick a ship for himself from Lando's lot. He chooses a small, beaten-up freighter. It'll need some repairs, but Han and Chewie will finally have a ship of their own. They take the ship back to Shug's garage, install some new armor and a few defensive weapons, and soon They're ready to start running spice for the Hutts again. All that's left for the ship is a new name. And Han knows the perfect one. Bria. Elsewhere in the galaxy, the growing rebellion harasses the Empire, and Palpatine decides it's time to stamp it out. The Emperor orders the Moffs to get the criminal elements within their sectors under control. Hutt space lies within Moff Sarn Shield's territory. For years, the Hutts have bribed Shield to ignore their activities, but now he decides to make an example of Nar Shaddaa. Shield says he will not touch Nal Hutta, but he orders his fleet to flatten the smuggler's moon. The Hutts decide to bribe the Moff again, and they send Han to Coruscant to meet with Shield. But the meeting is interrupted by a ghost from Han's past, a face he's never forgotten, Bria Theron. Dressed in a beautiful gown, Han's former girlfriend takes Shield's arm and kisses the Moff on the cheek. The sight stuns Han, but he's able to keep his expression neutral. Han offers Shield the bribe one last time, but the Moff is adamant. His fleet will lay waste to the smuggler's moon. While Han's on Coruscant, Jiliak and Jabba decide it's time to strike at the Basidiai clan. They contact Teroenza and put the plan to assassinate Auric into motion. Teroenza learns that the corpulent crime lord has a taste for Elysian Nala tree frogs. Before shipping the frogs to Auric, Teroenza keeps them in a water containing a deadly toxin. As Auric eats the frogs, he also ingests the toxin, and it starts to attack the crime lord's brain. Over several weeks, Auric eats hundreds of frogs. Eventually, the toxin proves too much for the crime lord. He suffers a severe brain hemorrhage and dies. Auric's son Durga immediately suspects foul play and contacts an Imperial medical team to take his father's body for examination. Auric's death leaves a power vacuum at the top of the Basidiai clan. Durga secretly contacts the Black Sun crime syndicate, and after a few unfortunate accidents happen to some of Durga's most vocal detractors, the young crime lord succeeds his father and assumes control of the Basidiai Khajiit. The Hutts learn that Admiral Winstel Greelanx will lead the attack on Nar Shaddaa. They send Han to bribe the Admiral for any information he can give them. Greelanx gives Han a list of precious gems he wants from the Hutts, and then he gives Han his battle plans for Nar Shaddaa. The attack will take place in 2 weeks. The Admiral also agrees to order his fleet to retreat at the first acceptable moment in the battle. Han returns with the plans, and he and Mako begin planning Nar Shaddaa's defense. The smugglers' plan begins with reconnaissance. Luckily for them, there are no Star Destroyers in Greelanx's fleet. The fleet's largest capital ships are a couple of dreadnoughts. Mako hides some of the smaller smuggler vessels in the space junk that orbits Nar Shaddaa. When the Imperial picket ships pass through the junk cloud, Mako orders the smugglers to attack. The fighting is fierce. The smugglers take a terrible beating, but they use the home turf to their advantage and slowly begin to knock out some of the Imperial fighters and picket ships. Still, it's obvious the Imperials are going to destroy the smuggler fleet. Admiral Greelanx orders one of his dreadnoughts to advance. Suddenly, a completely new fleet of smugglers emerges from hyperspace. Dozens of large fighting vessels appear in the Imperials' viewports. The dreadnought nearing Nar Shaddaa changes course abruptly and moves to confront the new ships. But something's weird. The Imperials can see the new fleet, but none of the ships appear on their scanners. And that's because it's a trick. More specifically, it's an illusion. Zavary employed dozens of holoprojectors to create the fleet and confuse the Imperials. And the ruse works. When the dreadnought turns toward Zavary's illusion, Mako orders his largest ships to flank the Imperial capital ship. The smugglers pound away at the dreadnought's engines, knocking them out. Admiral Greelanx watches in horror as the dreadnought falls toward Nar Shaddaa and explodes against the moon's shield. After losing one of his capital ships, Greelanx orders the retreat. The smuggler's moon is saved. 1 week after the battle, Han delivers the gems to Greelanx. Before he can leave, the Admiral receives a call that someone else is there to see him. Someone very important. Greelanx quickly shoves Han into an adjoining office. Han presses his ear to the door and hears Greelanx talking to someone. Han hears something that sounds like a respirator. The Admiral begins to speak, but he's cut off by a strange, robotic voice. Han hears Greelanx gag. There's a thud, and then nothing, except the sound of the respirator. Han holds his breath until whoever it is leaves the Admiral's office. He waits 5 more minutes for good measure, and then slowly opens the door. Han sees Greelanx dead on the floor. He grabs one of the gems lying beside the Admiral, a Krayt Dragon Pearl, and jumps into an escape pod. Chewie immediately picks up Han's distress beacon. The Wookiee swoops in, picks Han up, and the two friends head back to Nar Shaddaa. Time to take a break. When I return, I'll talk more about the Hutt Gambit. I'm Aaron Moats. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. Thank you for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, where we celebrate the books from Star Wars Legends. But allow me to recommend a book from Star Wars canon. Queen's Hope tells the story of Padme Amidala undertaking a secret mission during the Clone War, while her handmaiden and best friend, Sabe, doubles for Padme in the Senate. It's a fast-paced tale that's a fitting end to the Padme Amidala Queen's trilogy. That's Queen's Hope by E.K. Johnston. Welcome back to the Star Wars Legends Lounge, the show that celebrates the books from Star Wars Legends. I'm Aaron Moats. Today, I'm talking about The Hutt Gambit by A.C. Crispin, the second book in the Han Solo trilogy. So in Legends, this is the story where Han and Chewie meet. But we jump in after Han has already saved Chewie from the Imperials. Chewbacca has already pledged a life debt to Han. And, of course, Han doesn't really understand the enormity of the life debt. The reason we don't get to see how they actually met is because the author, A.C. Crispin, was told by Lucasfilm to not cover Han and Chewie's first encounter. They were saving that. Whether Lucas himself wanted to tell that story or they had another project in mind with how to show that story. So, all the author could do was say that it happened, that Han freed Chewbacca from Imperial slavery, and that Chewbacca pledged him a life debt, and that Han had been dishonorably discharged from the Imperial Navy. So when I was growing up, the way I imagined Han freeing Chewie from slavery was similar to what we got in the Solo movie from a couple years ago. Not exactly the same. Han was not in the Imperial Navy. He was in the Army by then. He was not a pilot. He was just a grunt. He was an infantry person. And it didn't show Chewbacca working amongst other Wookiee slaves. It shows Chewbacca imprisoned, chained up. And Han is thrown into the cell with the Wookiee and then helps him to escape. So similar, but there are definite differences between the story we actually got and the way I had imagined it playing out when I was younger. I had to cut a lot in my summary for this book because of how much happens. One of the scenes I cut down a lot was when Han sees Bria Theron for the first time in 5 years. The first time since he woke up in that hostel on Coruscant to the note and the credits that Bria had left him, saying that she couldn't be with Han, that if she stayed, Han would never be able to achieve his dreams of becoming an Imperial pilot, because she was still trying to get over the addiction she had for the exaltation from when she was a slave on Elysia. It says in the text that it took her more than 3 years to get over that addiction. So in the book, Han arrives on Coruscant. He is allowed into Moff Shield's office, but you can tell immediately that the Moff is not going to accept the bribe by the Hutts, and that the Moff has something else going on. He is dressed in his dress uniform. He is getting ready for something. He tells Han he only has 5 minutes, and then the young smuggler is going to have to leave. Right after Han offers the bribe, the door rings, and in walks Bria. She's dressed in a beautiful gown. Her red gold hair is done up in the latest Coruscant fashion. She and Han see each other. Han's experiences running cons in Garrus Shrike's operation when he was a little kid allows him to keep his face neutral upon seeing Bria. And Bria's able to keep her face neutral as well, although the two of them can see surprise in each other's eyes. Bria walks over to the Moff, takes his arm, gives him a peck on the cheek, and asks if he is ready. And Han is disgusted because he thinks that Bria is the Moff's much younger concubine. He doesn't betray his feelings in his expression, but according to the book, that's what he's thinking. Again, the Moff rejects the bribe, and Han is forced to leave. On his way back to Nar Shaddaa, he basically tells Chewbacca good riddance to Bria Theron. But what Han doesn't know is that Bria is not Moff Shield's concubine. Bria is just decoration for the Moff. He's not interested in her romantically, but he has to keep up appearances in the Imperial Court. And it turns out Bria has a reason for being there. She's a spy in the growing rebellion against the Empire. She's there to gather information on S.H.I.E.L.D. and on the Imperial Court in general. She is crestfallen after Han leaves. So the scene really is kind of a heart-wrenching scene because Han gets the wrong idea. It's clear that he still has feelings for Bria, and he finally just says, to heck with her. And Bria can tell that seeing her with Moff S.H.I.E.L.D. really hurts Han. And there's nothing she can say in that moment. She can't explain herself. She has to keep her deep cover. Because Bria's ultimate mission, the reason she joined the rebellion, is to free slaves throughout the galaxy. She's disgusted that the Empire keeps slaves. And she wants to free them. She wants to attack the Empire and free those slaves. And on a personal level, she wants to return to Elysia and free the slaves there. I think I enjoyed the first book a little more than this one. I think that book was a little more focused. The story was simply about Han Solo. You followed him everywhere. It was basically told from his point of view. This story jumps around. There are times where it is told from Han's point of view. And then it jumps to the Hutts, and it's told by Jilliak and Jabba's points of view. It jumps to the Basidiai clan, and it's told by Durga's point of view. It does, once or twice, jump to Bria's point of view. I understand why A.C. Crispin did this. This story is bigger than the one in the Paradise Snare. That was focused on Han, Bria, and everything that happened on Elysia. But the scope of this story is wider. It encompasses much more of the galaxy. It encompasses much more of the different things that are happening throughout the galaxy. It's a good story. I think I just preferred the more focused, smaller story in the Paradise Snare. One of the things that I really enjoyed in the Hutt Gambit was the space battle at the end. It was fast-paced. It was suspenseful. You were on the edge of your seat reading it. The plan the smugglers came up with was interesting. It was fascinating. You were rooting for them, and it was really cool when the plan worked. Of course, you, the reader, know the plan's going to work. The Empire is not going to win because if you've read any of Legends, you know that Nar Shaddaa is still there later in the timeline. The Empire was not going to wipe out civilization there. But even knowing that, I still found the space battle really exciting. I thought Crispin did a really good job of describing how everything was happening in space. Sometimes it's hard for me to picture in my mind how all the ships are moving, how the game board is laid out. I think there are plenty of authors in both Legends and canon that do a good job of describing that. I think there are more authors that don't do as good of a job describing that. I think one of the reasons so many people like Michael Stackpole's X-Wing books in Legends is because of how well he describes the space battles, how easy it is to see in your mind's eye everything that's happening. And I think Crispin does really well in this battle. The description of where the space junk is floating around Nar Shaddaa, of where the Imperial fleet emerges from hyperspace, as opposed to where the smugglers' fleet is stationed around the moon. The way the different Imperial ships are forced to navigate through the space junk to clear it to get down near the smugglers' fleet. I thought all that was easy to understand, easy to picture. And then, of course, when one of Greelanx's dreadnoughts is sent in to start the bombardment of the moon, how Crispin describes Zavari's illusion with the fake smugglers' fleet emerging from hyperspace, the way Crispin describes how the dreadnought turns, exposing one flank and its aft to the larger ships the smugglers have there by the moon, and then the two large ships that come out from around the backside of the moon, the pirates that the Hutts had hired, and then they hit that flank and the engines on the backside of the dreadnought. Yes, I think she did an excellent job describing this space battle. The only thing in this book that didn't work for me was the initial meeting between Han and Lando. Han gets hit by a paralyzing dart from Boba Fett. The Mandalorian bounty hunter is carrying Han back toward the spaceport to load him up onto Slave One. And just before he gets to his ship, Lando jumps out from behind Boba Fett, stuns him, grabs a hold of one of Boba Fett's paralyzing darts and uses it on Boba Fett himself. And then he and Han load Boba Fett up onto Slave One, set the ship to autopilot, and send it out away from Nar Shaddaa. I don't think that Lando would have gotten the jump on Boba Fett there in that way. I'm not saying that Lando could not have surprised Boba Fett, because I do think he could have done that. I don't think that Boba Fett is infallible. I don't believe he is this nearly omnipotent figure in the bounty hunting community, that he can never be outsmarted and that he can never be bested by someone. But the way Crispin describes Lando getting the jump on Boba Fett in this instance, I think it would have been much more difficult than the way it happened in this book. But that's really the only thing in the book that didn't work for me. So, we're 2/3 of the way through the Han Solo trilogy. The Paradise Snare, I liked a lot. The Hutt Gambit, I enjoyed. Not quite as much as the Paradise Snare, but I really like this book as well. We only have one book to go, Rebel Dawn. And we'll see, hopefully, I enjoy it as much as these first two stories. Well, it's almost time to go. But first, I have a listener opinion to share with everyone. TJ from the first part of the show is back. TJ says he noticed something when he was reading the final book of the Jedi Academy series, Champions of the Force by Kevin J. Anderson. And he wanted to share his insight. TJ says, the book drew obvious parallels between Kip Duran and Turpin. Turpin was someone who had an actual brain control / brainwashing device that made him betray the New Republic. The author is putting that in parallel with the influence that Exar Kun has over the different students at Luke's Academy. These books have an overarching theme of different types of brainwashing and influence. On the podcast, you commented on the way Exar Kun used words to try to influence Kip. But I would posit that the author was trying to make the argument that it was a type of brainwashing by paralleling it with Turpin's story. And that is why the story justifies Kip's lack of consequences for his actions. I'm not sure that the argument is well made. It is a weird trend within Star Wars to have such war crimes without consequences. It could do well to have a more nuanced perspective. Thank you very much for your opinion, TJ. It gives myself and all the listeners something to think about. Now, listener, if you have an opinion you'd like to share, like TJ did, you can send me an email at swlegendslounge@gmail.com or send me a message on Twitter, Instagram, or Blue Sky at swlegendslounge. And keep sending in your Star Wars character groupings. I haven't gotten any of those in a while. Send me your Mount Rushmores, your fighter squadrons, your road trip crews. And if you disagree with something that I've said on the podcast and you'd like to offer a different opinion, let me know. I'll read it on the show. Now, coming up on the next episode, I'll wrap up the Han Solo trilogy with the final book, Rebel Dawn, by A.C. Crispin. You can look forward to that episode coming out on November 15th. Thank you so much for listening to the Star Wars Legends Lounge. I'm Aaron Moats. May the Force be with you. And remember, there's always a bit of truth in Legends.